In 1943, high above the Pacific Ocean, two fighters met in the sky. One was light, fast, and feared, the Japanese Zero. The other was heavier, slower, and newly built, the American F6F Hellcat. Every pilot knew which one was supposed to win. The Zero had ruled the air since Pearl Harbor. It could turn tighter, climb faster, and dance through the clouds like a ghost. The Hellcat? It was built in a rush, designed by men who had never faced a Zero in combat. When the blueprints left the Grumman factory floor, some pilots quietly wondered if they were being sent to die. But what happened next would shock the world, because the slower plane, the one nobody believed in, would go on to destroy the Zero with a kill ratio so impossible, even the engineers doubted the numbers. 19-1. 19 enemy planes destroyed for every Hellcat lost. No other fighter in World War II ever matched that record. This is the story of how it happened. The story of how design, discipline, and determination turned defeat into dominance. It's not just about machines of war. It's about the minds behind them, the pilots inside them, and the moment when speed stopped being enough to win. To understand why the Hellcat achieved the impossible, we have to go back to the beginning, to the dark months when Japan owned the skies and America had no answer. In 1940, a new predator appeared in the skies over Asia. The Japanese called it the Mitsubishi A6M0. To the world, it became a symbol of fear. It was fast, light, and impossibly agile. At Pearl Harbor, it swept American fighters from the sky. Across the Pacific, from the Philippines to Singapore, no Allied pilot could match it. The Zero was a masterpiece of engineering. Its secret was simplicity. No armor. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Every gram was sacrificed for speed and maneuverability. In the early months of the war, the results were devastating. For every Japanese Zero lost, several American planes went down. It could outturn, outclimb, and outrange anything the Allies had. The Americans tried to fight back with the F6F Wildcat. It was brave, but outdated. Pilots like John Thatch developed new tactics, but they were flying a machine already past its prime. By mid-1942, Japan ruled the air. Its pilots were skilled, confident, and battle-hardened. The Zero seemed unstoppable, but hidden within its brilliance was a fatal flaw. It could dance, but it couldn't take a punch. One burst of heavy gunfire, and it burned like paper. The United States needed an answer, fast. A plane that could take hits, dive faster, climb higher, and still bring its pilot home alive. And so, in a small workshop on Long Island, New York, engineers at Grumman Aircraft began work on a new kind of fighter. It wouldn't be elegant. It wouldn't be light, but it would be built to win. In the spring of 1942, inside a modest factory on Long Island, a small team of engineers faced an impossible deadline. Their mission was simple on paper, but critical for survival: build a fighter that could beat the Zero. At the head of that team stood a man named Leroy Grumman. He was practical, stubborn, and deeply loyal to the pilots who would fly his planes. He once said, "If we don't build it strong enough to bring the pilot home, then we've failed." The first prototype, the XF6F, was designed with lessons learned the hard way. Grumman's team studied wrecked Wildcats, combat reports, and pilot letters from the front lines. They weren't chasing speed, they were building toughness. The new fighter would be larger and heavier, yes, but it would also carry thicker armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a bigger engine. The mighty Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. 18 cylinders of raw American power. When the first Hellcat rolled out in June 1942, nobody cheered. It wasn't sleek like the Zero. It looked bulky, almost clumsy. But on the inside, it was a pilot's dream. Stable, forgiving, and nearly indestructible. During test flights, pilots pushed it hard. They dove, spun, stalled, and slammed it onto the deck of carrier prototypes. And every time, the Hellcat came back in one piece. One Navy pilot joked, "You can land a Hellcat in a thunderstorm and still make it to dinner." It could absorb damage and keep flying, something the Zero could never do. When the first production models reached the Pacific in 1943, the timing couldn't have been better. The tide of the war was turning. America was taking the offensive. And now, for the first time, U.S. pilots had a plane built not to survive the Zero, but to destroy it. By 1943, the Pacific War had reached a critical stage. American carriers were pushing back against Japanese dominance. But success depended on more than numbers. It depended on the new fighter in the skies. The Hellcat's first true test came in the Solomon Islands. Pilots reported a plane that could climb, dive, and outgun the Zero. Tactics changed overnight. Instead of dogfighting, pilots learned to use speed, altitude, and teamwork. In battle after battle, the Hellcat proved its worth. Squadrons flew from carriers like the USS Enterprise and USS Essex. They strafed Japanese bombers, intercepted fighters, and escorted bombers deep into enemy territory. One of the most famous engagements was the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. It became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American Hellcats shredded Japanese aircraft in overwhelming numbers. Pilots claimed hundreds of enemy planes destroyed in a single day. The combination of pilot skill, smart tactics, and the Hellcat's durability created an unstoppable force. Where the Zero relied on agility, the Hellcat relied on strength and strategy. Pilots dove from above, fired in controlled bursts, and used the aircraft's superior power to dictate the fight. By the end of 1944, the results were clear. The Hellcat had leveled the playing field, and then some. Every encounter with the Zero now favored the Americans. The 19-to-1 kill ratio was no longer a rumor. It was reality. The slower plane had won. Through planning, engineering, and courage, the Americans had turned the tide in the Pacific skies. The Hellcat was powerful, but a plane alone does not win a war. Pilots had to be trained to use it properly. American instructors developed a simple but deadly philosophy: never turn with a Zero. The Zero could outmaneuver almost any plane in a tight dogfight, but it was fragile. Pilots were taught to dive, climb, and fight on their terms. Squadron leaders drilled formations relentlessly. They flew mock battles over training fields in the United States before seeing combat. Every maneuver was practiced until instinct, not thought, controlled their actions. The thatch weave became a standard tactic. Two planes would fly in a crisscross pattern, covering each other. If a Zero attacked one plane, the other could fire from a safe position. It was teamwork over individual skill, and it saved countless lives. Pilots also learned to use the Hellcat's strengths. The R-2800 engine allowed sudden dives and bursts of speed. The plane could absorb damage other fighters could not survive. Heavy machine guns tore through enemy aircraft that relied on thin armor. Veterans recalled the difference vividly. A seasoned pilot could look at a Zero, know its weaknesses, and attack with precision. Even in overwhelming odds, the Hellcat squadron could emerge victorious. This combination of technology and tactics transformed American air power. It wasn't luck. It was preparation, discipline, and understanding the enemy better than the enemy understood itself. By the time the Hellcat reached full production, it was not just a plane. It was a weapon of strategy, a tool that amplified the courage and skill of every pilot who climbed into its cockpit. The Hellcat was not the fastest plane in the sky. It could not outturn the Japanese Zero. It was heavier, larger, and less graceful in a dogfight. But speed and agility were only part of the equation. The Hellcat's strength lay in technology and design, in understanding what the Zero could not handle. Its engine, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800, produced massive power for its size. It could dive faster, climb higher, and sustain maneuvers that would have destroyed lighter aircraft. Every structural component was reinforced. Every panel, every rivet, every design choice focused on survivability. The Zero was elegant but fragile. It relied on maneuverability, lightweight, and pilot skill. The Hellcat relied on power, protection, and firepower. In combat, this difference became decisive. A Hellcat could dive on a Zero, shoot with 6.50 caliber machine guns, and escape before the enemy could react. It could absorb hits that would destroy a Zero instantly. The pilot's life expectancy increased simply by being inside a stronger plane. American engineers had calculated carefully. They knew the Zero's strengths and weaknesses. The Hellcat was built not to match the Zero in every way, but to exploit its vulnerabilities. By combining careful engineering with superior tactics, the Americans created a fighter that could dominate even the most agile enemy. It was a lesson in strategy. Sometimes, being slower and heavier wins the war if you understand how to use your advantages. By the end of the Pacific War, the numbers told a story that seemed impossible. For every Hellcat lost in air-to-air combat, 19 Japanese planes were destroyed. How could this happen? The answer lies in a combination of design, training, tactics, and opportunity. The Hellcat was built to survive hits. Its engine could push it faster in a dive than any Zero could follow. Its armor protected pilots from bullets that would have killed them in lighter planes. Its guns could destroy enemy aircraft in a single pass. American pilots were trained to exploit these advantages. They did not engage in tight, turning battles where the Zero excelled. They used teamwork, altitude, and speed to dictate each fight. Even an inexperienced pilot could succeed if they followed the rules. The Japanese Zero, brilliant as it was, had weaknesses that became fatal. It could not absorb damage. It could not sustain high-speed dives. It had limited range and fuel, forcing pilots to fight under strict conditions. When American forces gained experience, began flying Hellcats in larger numbers, and used disciplined tactics, the result was devastating. Squadrons that had once feared the Zero now dominated the skies. The 19-to-1 kill ratio was not luck. It was the result of careful planning, engineering intelligence, rigorous training, and relentless execution. The slower plane had turned the tide of the air war in the Pacific, proving that raw agility was no match for strategy, preparation, and courage. By the time the war ended, the Hellcat had claimed more than 5,100 enemy aircraft destroyed. It had become the most successful naval fighter in history, and it had done so by embracing its strengths and exploiting the weaknesses of its enemy. The Hellcat was more than a plane. It was a symbol of innovation, courage, and determination. It showed that a heavier, slower fighter could dominate the skies when design and strategy worked together. The pilots who flew the Hellcat were ordinary men doing extraordinary things. They climbed into the cockpit, knowing they faced an enemy that had once seemed unbeatable. They relied on their training, their instincts, and the machine beneath them. For every Zero shot down, for every life saved, the Hellcat proved that preparation and teamwork mattered as much as skill. It was a lesson in resilience, in turning fear into victory, and in fighting smarter rather than faster. Even today, the story of the Hellcat inspires awe. It reminds us that the underdog can prevail, that innovation and courage can overturn expectations, and that history often favors those who combine brains, bravery, and relentless effort. The Pacific skies of World War II were never the same after the Hellcat arrived. And for the men who flew her, the memory of victory and survival remained a lifetime testament to the slow, sturdy fighter that should have lost, but didn't. The story of the Hellcat is a story of hope, ingenuity, and the extraordinary power of human determination. It is a story that deserves to be remembered.